I never thought clearing snow for my neighbors would lead to a war involving lawyers and the state attorney general, but that's the funny thing about petty tyrants. They have a way of turning a simple act of kindness into a federal case. My name is Jack, and for the better part of 20 years, I've run a small landscaping and snow removal business out of my home in a quiet subdivision called Oakwood Creek Estates. It was the kind of place people moved to for peace. The lots were big, the trees were old, and the neighbors mostly kept to themselves, save for a friendly wave or a shared beer over a fence line. I liked it that way. My work is loud and dirty, and my peace comes from the quiet of my own home at the end of the day. I was one of the original homeowners in the development. I'd watched it grow from a dozen houses surrounded by farmland to a full-fledged community of about 80 homes. I knew almost everyone, if not by name, then by the type of lawn they kept or the car they drove. I'd mowed most of their lawns and plowed most of their driveways at one time or another. It was a good, stable life built on simple transactions and mutual respect. Our homeowners association was, for most of those years, a joke. It was run by a rotation of old-timers who mostly just wanted to make sure the grass in the little common area by the entrance got mowed and the "Welcome to Oakwood Creek" sign didn't fall over. Dues were $100 a year, and the annual meeting was usually 5 people in Mr. Henderson's living room, drinking stale coffee and voting to keep things exactly as they were. It was perfect. Then, about 3 years ago, Brenda moved in. She bought the new build on the corner lot, the biggest one in the subdivision, and it was like a storm front moving in. You could feel the atmospheric pressure change. Brenda was a woman in her late 50s who carried herself with the unshakable certainty of someone who has never been told she was wrong. She had a sharp, bird-like face, hair that was sprayed into a permanent helmet, and a voice that could cut glass. She'd apparently been the president of the board at her last 3 residences, a fact she shared with anyone who stood still long enough to listen, as if it were a credential on par with a Nobel Prize. Within 6 months, she had taken over our sleepy little HOA. The old board members, guys like Mr. Henderson who were in their 70s and just wanted to fish, didn't stand a chance. She came to the annual meeting with binders, charts, and a PowerPoint presentation. She talked about protecting property values and enforcing community standards. Most of us just shrugged. It all sounded like a lot of hot air, and if she wanted to do the work of nagging people about their garbage cans, more power to her. We voted her in as president just to get the meeting over with so we could go home and watch the game. It was a catastrophic mistake. The changes started small, like a slow-leaking poison. First, it was a multi-page newsletter, printed on expensive glossy paper, detailing the new enforcement of old, forgotten bylaws. Mailboxes had to be a specific shade of black. No lawn ornaments, except for a tasteful, pre-approved list of seasonal decorations. Garbage cans could not be visible from the street except for a 12-hour window on collection day. Little things. Annoying things. I got a notice because the lettering on my work truck, parked in my own driveway, was deemed commercial signage and a violation of the aesthetic code. I argued that it was my personal vehicle required for my livelihood, but I got a sternly worded letter back quoting a bylaw that was so vague it could have outlawed the color blue. I started parking the truck in my garage. It was easier than fighting. That was the sentiment across the whole neighborhood. It's easier than fighting. We all just wanted to be left alone. The real trouble, the event that turned our simmering annoyance into a full-blown conflict, started with snow. It was the middle of January, and the biggest blizzard in a decade was bearing down on us. The weather forecasters were using words like historic and crippling. For me, that meant work. I spent 2 days before the storm prepping my equipment, my big Ford F-350 with the 10-foot V-plow, the commercial-grade snow blower, and a few dozen bags of salt and sand. When the snow started falling, it was beautiful for about an hour, and then it became a menace. It fell for 36 straight hours. When it finally stopped, we were buried under 3 feet of wet, heavy snow. The governor declared a state of emergency. Nothing was moving. I was up before dawn, the engine of my truck rumbling to life in the pre-dawn darkness. My first priority was always my clients, the ones who had contracts. But this was different. This was my neighborhood. I started with my next-door neighbor, Mrs. Gable, a widow in her 80s who I knew had a heart condition and needed to be able to get out for a potential emergency. I cleared her driveway and her walkway right up to the front door. She waved from the window, a look of pure relief on her face. Then I did Mr. Henderson's place across the street. He was diabetic and had a dialysis appointment he couldn't miss. One by one, I started working my way down the block, digging out the people I knew were elderly or had young kids. I wasn't charging anyone. This was just being a neighbor. This was what you did. I was about halfway through clearing the driveway for the Millers, a young couple with a newborn, when a figure came marching through the deep snow across the street. It was Brenda. She was bundled up in a ridiculously expensive-looking ski jacket, her face a mask of indignation. She stopped at the edge of the driveway, hands on her hips, and glared at me over the roar of my diesel engine. I put the truck in park and killed the engine, the sudden silence broken only by the wind. "Can I help you, Brenda?" I asked, leaning out the window. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded, her voice sharp and loud in the cold air. "You know perfectly well that operating a commercial business out of your home is against the covenants." I stared at her, genuinely confused for a moment. "Brenda, I'm helping my neighbors dig out from a historic blizzard. Mrs. Gable needs to be able to get an ambulance if she has to. The Millers might need to get their baby to a doctor. This isn't a business transaction. It is a commercial vehicle on association property performing a commercial service," she snapped, pointing a gloved finger at my truck. "Furthermore, you are creating unapproved modifications to the landscape. These snow piles are not in compliance with community standards." I actually laughed. I couldn't help it. "Snow piles? Brenda, it's a blizzard. Where would you like me to put the snow?" "In my pocket." Her face tightened, and the last shred of civility vanished. "This is not a laughing matter, Jack. You are in direct violation of Bylaw 7, Section 4, Prohibited Activities. I am officially giving you a verbal warning. Cease all unauthorized plowing activity immediately." I shook my head, my patience evaporating. "No. I'm not going to do that. People are trapped in their homes." "Then you leave me no choice," she said, her voice dropping to a low, menacing tone. "Consider this your first official notice. You will be fined $100 per residence for this violation. And the fines will double for every day you remain in non-compliance. I will have the notices posted on your door this afternoon." She turned on her heel and marched back toward her pristine, snow-covered driveway, leaving me sitting there in my truck, stunned. $100 per driveway. I'd already done $400. And she was threatening to double it daily. The absurdity of it was staggering. I was being fined for helping an old woman. That was the moment I knew this wasn't about rules anymore. This was about power, and she was going to use it to crush anyone who didn't bow down. I took a deep breath, fired up the truck, and lowered the plow. I finished the Miller's driveway. True to her word, that afternoon, taped to my front door was a crisp envelope. Inside were 4 separate violation notices, each for $100, citing unauthorized commercial landscaping and alteration of terrain. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. I crumpled them up and threw them in the trash. I spent the rest of the day and most of the next clearing out every driveway on my street and the 2 adjacent ones. I helped shovel out fire hydrants. I cleared a path for the mailman, who eventually made it through 2 days later. By the time I was done, I had cleared over 24 driveways. I didn't ask for a dime from anyone. People brought me coffee, hot chocolate, and one family insisted I take a whole pot of beef stew. It felt good. It felt like a community. The fines kept coming. Every day, a new batch of envelopes appeared on my door, the amounts growing exponentially. 100 became 200, then 400 per violation. By the end of the week, according to Brenda's unhinged accounting, I owed the Oakwood Creek Estates HOA something in the neighborhood of $20,000. It was so ludicrous it was almost funny, but there was a menacing edge to it. The letters were now coming via certified mail, forcing me to go to the post office and sign for my own harassment. They were professionally printed, citing bylaws and statutes, clearly drafted by a lawyer. She was spending our HOA dues to persecute me for being a good neighbor. The real impact of Brenda's vendetta wasn't just on my wallet, though. It was on the whole neighborhood. While she was obsessed with my plowing of private driveways, she completely neglected the HOA's primary responsibility in a snowstorm, clearing the main access roads within the subdivision. Normally, the HOA would contract that out. More often than not, they contracted it to me. But this year, I received no call. Brenda, in her infinite wisdom, had decided to source a more compliant vendor. The problem was, in the middle of a state of emergency, every plow company with a pulse was booked solid. So our roads remained untouched. Thick, impassable sheets of ice and packed snow. The consequences were immediate. The mail truck couldn't get through for 3 days. A school bus trying to navigate the icy road slid into a ditch, thankfully with no kids on board yet. The most terrifying incident happened at the Henderson's place. Mr. Henderson had a medical emergency related to his dialysis, and his wife called for an ambulance. The paramedics had to park at the main entrance to the subdivision and trudge a 1/4 mile through deep, unplowed snow with their gear to reach him. It turned a 10-minute response time into a 30-minute ordeal. He was fine, thank God, but it shook everyone. This had gone from a petty squabble to a genuine public safety issue. People were starting to get angry, but they were also afraid. Brenda had cultivated an atmosphere of fear. She had fined people for everything from holiday lights being up a day too long to oil stains on their driveways. No one wanted to be her next target. I would see neighbors at the grocery store, and they'd pull me aside and whisper their support. "What she's doing to you is wrong, Jack," they'd say, looking over their shoulders as if Brenda herself might pop out from behind a display of canned peas. They were on my side, but they were too intimidated to say it out loud. The final straw for me was the letter that arrived not by post, but by a process server. It was thick, heavy, and full of legalese. It was a formal notice of intent to place a lien on my property for non-payment of fines totaling, at that point, over $35,000. My house. The home I had built my life in, the cornerstone of my business and my security. She was threatening to take my house away over snow piles. That was it. The line had been crossed. This was no longer a ridiculous dispute I could ignore. This was a direct threat to my entire life. That afternoon, I called a lawyer. His name was Frank Miller, a recommendation from a cousin. He wasn't some high-powered corporate attorney, he was a small-town guy with a reputation for being a bulldog when it came to fighting traffic tickets, zoning boards, and, as it turned out, overzealous HOAs. I sat in his cluttered office, laying out the whole story, piling the violation notices and threatening letters on his desk. He listened patiently, steepled his fingers, and a slow grin spread across his face. "Wow," he said, picking up one of the notices. "This is a special kind of crazy. A lien for shoveling snow for your neighbors. I think I'm going to enjoy this." Frank confirmed what I suspected, Brenda was way out of bounds. The bylaws she was citing were vague and likely unenforceable in this context. But he also warned me that fighting an HOA, even a crazy one, can be a long, expensive slog through the courts. They can use the association's money to fight you, he explained, which means you're basically paying them to sue you. It's a nasty system. He told me our best bet wasn't to fight the fines directly, at least not at first. He suggested a different angle. "We need to go on the offensive," he said, leaning forward. "An HOA board has legal obligations, fiduciary duties, responsibilities to its members. The biggest one is transparency. You, as a homeowner and a member of the association, have a legal right to inspect their records. All of them. Meeting minutes, contracts, and especially financial statements." He looked at me pointedly. "Let's ask to see the books. Let's see how she's spending all that money she's so eager to collect." It was a brilliant idea. It shifted the focus from my violations to her conduct. It was time to stop reacting and start investigating. Following Frank's instructions, I drafted a formal, Polite letter. I cited the specific state statutes that guaranteed me access to the records and requested a time to come and inspect all financial documents, including bank statements, invoices, and receipts, for the past 3 years, covering the entirety of Brenda's tenure as president. I sent it via certified mail, return receipt requested. The first shot in our counteroffensive had been fired. A week went by with no response. Then another. The silence was telling. If everything was above board, providing the record should have been a simple, if annoying, task. Her refusal to even acknowledge my request was a massive red flag. Finally, a letter arrived. It wasn't from Brenda, it was from a high-priced law firm in the city. The letter was a masterpiece of condescending legal threats. It accused me of a campaign of harassment against the board president. It claimed my request was overly broad, burdensome, and not made in good faith, and it concluded with a chilling threat: if I continued to harass the board with frivolous demands, the association would seek a restraining order against me and pursue legal action to recover damages. I immediately took the letter to Frank. He read it, and the grin on his face grew wider. "We've got her," he said, tapping the letter with his finger. "This is it. This is the whole case." He explained that under state law, her refusal was illegal. The reasons they gave for denying the request were complete nonsense. An HOA cannot legally deny a member access to financial records, period. Threatening a lawsuit for simply exercising my legal rights was an intimidation tactic, and a clumsy one at that. "She's hiding something," Frank said, his voice buzzing with excitement. "People don't burn down the house to hide a messy kitchen. They do it to hide a body. She's not just a bully, Jack. I'm willing to bet she's a crook." This was the turning point. The moment the fight became about more than just me and my snowplow. It was about uncovering the truth. We had leverage now, real, tangible leverage. Brenda's own paranoia and secrecy had become her greatest vulnerability. Frank and I immediately shifted our strategy from defense to a full frontal assault. He drafted a new letter, this one addressed to her lawyers. It was cold, professional, and brutal. It cited the specific statutes she was violating, the penalties for which included personal liability for the board members. It stated that her client's refusal to produce the documents was evidence of potential malfeasance and that we were giving her one final opportunity, a deadline of 5 business days, to comply. If she failed, we would not only file a lawsuit to compel the release of the records but would also be filing a formal complaint with the State Attorney General's office, requesting a full investigation into the association's finances and governance. While the legal gears were turning, I started working on the community front. I couldn't do this alone. I went to Mr. Henderson first. I showed him the letters, both mine and the one from the HOA's lawyer. As a former board member, he was appalled. "This is not how this association is supposed to work," he said, his voice trembling with quiet anger. "Our dues are for mowing the grass, not for lawyers to threaten good people." He agreed to help. We started talking to other neighbors, quietly at first. We chose people we trusted, people who had also had run-ins with Brenda. The family with the non-compliant basketball hoop. The woman who was fined because her dog barked at the mailman. The story was the same everywhere: frustration, anger, and a sense of helplessness. Showing them the lawyer's letter was the key. It proved this wasn't just a personal vendetta between me and Brenda. It showed that she was willing to use association funds to silence any dissent. We formed a small committee. Our plan was simple. The annual HOA meeting was in 3 weeks. We would rally as many homeowners as we could to attend. We would get me on the agenda to speak, and I would lay out the entire story for everyone to hear, culminating in her illegal refusal to show us the books. We were going to put her on trial in front of the very people she claimed to represent. The days leading up to the meeting were tense. We knew Brenda would be preparing for a fight. But for the first time in 3 years, there was a spark of hope in Oakwood Creek. We weren't just a collection of cowed homeowners anymore. We were a community getting ready to take itself back. The night of the annual meeting, the community hall we'd rented was packed. In previous years, you were lucky if a dozen people showed up. Tonight, there must have been over 100. The room was buzzing with a nervous energy. People were standing along the walls, every chair was taken. Brenda and her two cronies on the board sat at a table at the front, looking out at the crowd with expressions that mingled surprise with deep annoyance. She clearly wasn't expecting this kind of turnout. She banged her gavel, a little too loudly, and called the meeting to order. The first part of the meeting was a painful slog through Brenda's self-congratulatory report. She detailed her achievements for the year, the successful implementation of the new mailbox policy, the 27% increase in fine revenue, the beautification of the front entrance with some sad-looking shrubs. She spoke with an air of smug satisfaction, completely oblivious to the simmering resentment in the room. Then, she made a critical error. She opened the floor to new business. Mr. Henderson, calm and dignified, stood up immediately. "Madam President," he said, his voice carrying surprising strength. "According to the agenda, Jack Erickson has the floor." Brenda's face soured. "Mr. Erickson's issue is a private compliance matter and is not appropriate for public discussion," she snapped. But it was too late. A chorus of voices from the crowd yelled, "Let him speak." She was outnumbered. Defeated for the moment, she glared at me and spat, "Fine. You have 3 minutes." I walked to the front of the room, carrying a small folder. I didn't stand at the podium, I stood on the floor, on the same level as my neighbors. I took a deep breath. "My name is Jack Erickson, and I've lived here for 20 years, I began, my voice steady. I've plowed many of your driveways. I've mowed your lawns. I consider you all my neighbors. And that's why, when the blizzard hit last month, I did what neighbors do. I helped dig people out. I made sure Mrs. Gable could get an ambulance. I made sure the Hendersons could get to the hospital. I didn't ask for a penny." I paused, letting that sink in. "For this," I continued, holding up one of the violation notices, "our HOA president, Brenda, has decided I should be punished. She has fined me over $35,000. She is threatening to put a lien on my home and take it from me." A wave of murmurs and gasps swept through the room. I kept going, my voice rising with controlled anger. When a government, and that's what an HOA is, a small government, levies a $35,000 fine against a citizen, that citizen has a right to ask questions. They have a right to see how their money is being spent. So, I exercised my legal right as a homeowner. I formally requested access to the HOA's financial records. I opened my folder and pulled out the letter from her law firm. This is the response I received. It is a letter from the association's lawyer, a lawyer you are all paying for. It doesn't offer a date for me to see the books. It doesn't explain a delay. It threatens me. It accuses me of harassment for asking to see our own financial records. It threatens me with a lawsuit if I ask again. I then read the key paragraphs from the letter aloud, my voice ringing in the silent hall. The threat of a restraining order. The accusation of acting in bad faith. When I finished, I looked directly at Brenda. Her face was ashen, her usual confident smirk replaced by a tight, panicked grimace. I then turned back to my neighbors. "So I have a simple question for the board, and for all of you. According to state law, these records belong to us. We have an absolute right to see them. So what is on those financial statements that President Brenda is spending our money to hide from us?" The room exploded. It was like a dam breaking. People were on their feet, shouting questions, demanding answers. Brenda started banging her gavel frantically, screaming, "Order! You are all out of order. This is a private matter?" But she had lost all control. Her two allies on the board looked terrified, shrinking in their chairs. Mr. Henderson stood up again. "It is not a private matter when you use association funds to threaten a member. We demand to see the books. Show us the books." The chant started, low at first, then growing louder. "Show us the books. Show us the books." Brenda's face had gone from pale to a deep, blotchy red. She stood up, her eyes wild with fury. "You ungrateful people," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "I have worked tirelessly to protect your property values, and this is the thanks I get? You are all in violation. I'll sue every single one of you for slander." It was a complete meltdown, a total collapse of her carefully constructed authority. And in that moment of chaos, I delivered the final blow. "You won't have to," I said, my voice cutting through the noise. "Because your refusal to comply with state law has already been reported. 2 weeks ago, my attorney filed a formal complaint on my behalf with the State Attorney General's office. They have opened an official investigation into the financial management of the Oakwood Creek Estates Homeowners Association. So you won't be showing the records to me. You'll be showing them to the state." If the room had been loud before, it was now dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop. The color drained completely from Brenda's face. The threat of suing her neighbors was one thing, the reality of a government investigation was another. She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing, but no sound came out. She grabbed her purse, shoved past her stunned board members, and fled the room, pushing her way through the crowd of silent, staring homeowners. The meeting ended right then and there. We had won. The tyrant had been deposed. But the real battle was just beginning. The aftermath of that meeting was swift and decisive. The Attorney General's investigation, which Brenda had inadvertently triggered by her own stonewalling, was anything but routine. They didn't just ask for the records, they subpoenaed them. Bank statements, contracts, invoices, emails, everything. 2 of the board members, the ones who had been Brenda's loyal rubber stamps, resigned immediately, sending panicked letters to the AG's office promising their full cooperation. Mr. Henderson was appointed by a community vote to head an interim committee to work with the investigators. I was interviewed several times by a very serious, very thorough investigator from the AG's Financial Crimes Unit. I handed over my entire file, every fine, every certified letter, every communication from Brenda and her lawyers. They were particularly interested in the letter threatening me for requesting the financials. The investigator told me that was the single piece of evidence that escalated it from a standard complaint to a high-priority investigation. It was, in his words, a classic sign of covering up a crime. And what a crime it was. Frank's instincts had been dead on. Brenda wasn't just a power-mad bully, she was an audacious thief. The investigation uncovered a systematic scheme of embezzlement that had been going on for her entire 3-year term as president. It was depressingly simple. She had created a shell company, a landscaping and maintenance firm called Community Enhancements, LLC. The company had a P.O. box, a generic website, and one owner, Brenda. She had been awarding no-bid contracts to her own company for services that were either never performed or were grossly inflated. The beautiful new shrubs at the entrance that she was so proud of? She'd billed the HOA $5,000 for them through her company. The actual cost from the nursery was under $500. The road maintenance contracts, including the snow removal she had failed to provide during the blizzard? She had paid her own company $20,000 for a yearly contract, while I, and other legitimate vendors, had previously done the work for half that. She was generating fake invoices, writing checks from the HOA account to her shell company, and then depositing the money right into her personal bank account. Over 3 years, she had stolen more than $90,000 from her neighbors. Our neighbors. Our $100 annual dues were funding her vacations and her expensive ski jackets. When the final report from the Attorney General came out, the community was stunned. We knew she was a tyrant, but we never imagined she was a common criminal. The anger that had been simmering for years boiled over into a cold, hard demand for justice. Brenda was arrested and charged with multiple felonies, including grand larceny, wire fraud, and embezzlement. Her trial was short. The evidence was overwhelming, a mountain of forged invoices and bank records. She was convicted on all counts. The judge, citing her flagrant abuse of trust and the harm she had caused to the community, sentenced her to 3 to 5 years in state prison and ordered her to pay full restitution of every dollar she had stolen. For me, the resolution was blessedly simple. The interim board, under Mr. Henderson's leadership, held an emergency meeting. Their first official act was to pass a unanimous resolution voiding all fines and legal actions initiated by Brenda against me. The $35,000 absurdity vanished with the stroke of a pen. The lien was never filed. I was officially, completely vindicated. I became something of a local hero, which I found deeply uncomfortable. People would stop me in the street to shake my hand. The Millers brought over a case of my favorite beer. Mrs. Gable baked me so many apple pies I had to start giving them away. All I had done was refuse to be bullied, but in doing so, I had accidentally liberated the entire neighborhood. The community itself began to heal and reform. We held a special election and voted in a whole new board, led by the steady and sensible Mr. Henderson. Their first act was to hire a professional, third-party management company to handle the finances, ensuring transparency and accountability. Next, they formed a committee to rewrite our bylaws. We kept the important stuff about maintaining property but stripped out all the petty, controlling nonsense that Brenda had weaponized. The new rules were based on common sense and neighborly respect, not on the whims of a single person. Oakwood Creek Estate started to feel like home again. The atmosphere of fear was gone, replaced by a renewed sense of cooperation and community spirit. People started talking to each other again. We had a neighborhood barbecue that summer, the first one in years. It felt like we had all survived a long, dark storm together. A few years have passed since the Great HOA War. Oakwood Creek is quieter now, but it's a comfortable quiet, not a fearful one. The HOA is just what it should be, a boring, functional entity that makes sure the grass gets cut. Mr. Henderson served his term as president and has since retired to go fishing, leaving the board in capable hands. The neighborhood has thrived. With the cloud of Brenda's reign lifted, property values have steadily climbed, and young families are moving in again. The sense of community that was forged in that fight has endured. People look out for one another. When a snowstorm hits now, a half dozen of us with plows and snow blowers are out there clearing driveways, not because we have to, but because we want to. No one ever thinks to call it a violation. I did see Brenda one more time. It was about a year ago. I was at a big box hardware store in a town about an hour away, picking up some supplies. I was in the checkout line when I saw her. She was working as a cashier. She looked smaller, diminished. The helmet of hair was gone, replaced by a simple, tired-looking cut. The sharp, arrogant light in her eyes had been extinguished. She looked up, and our eyes met for a brief second. A flicker of recognition, followed by a wave of shame, washed over her face. She quickly looked down, focusing intently on scanning the items for the customer in front of me. She didn't say a word. I didn't either. I could have moved to another line, but I stayed. When it was my turn, she scanned my items without looking at me, her movements stiff and awkward. "That'll be $42.50, she mumbled to the register screen. I paid with my card, and as I turned to leave, I just said, "Have a good day." She flinched, but didn't reply. As I walked away, I didn't feel triumph or anger. I just felt a strange, quiet pity. The justice system had done its work. The community had healed. There was nothing left to be angry about. She was just a sad woman in a hardware store, a ghost from a battle fought and won long ago. Looking back on it all, the whole ugly affair taught me a few things. It taught me that the worst kinds of tyrants aren't always the ones on the world stage. Sometimes they're right in your own backyard, armed with a binder of bylaws and an insatiable hunger for control. It taught me that most people will put up with an astonishing amount of nonsense just to avoid a confrontation. But it also taught me that there is a breaking point, a line that, once crossed, can awaken a sleeping giant. It proved that a community is more than just a collection of houses, it's a shared responsibility. When that responsibility is threatened, ordinary people can do extraordinary things. And finally, it taught me that the most powerful weapon against corruption and secrecy is often the simplest one, a stubborn, unwavering demand for the truth. Sometimes, all you have to do to bring a bully's entire empire crashing down is stand up in a crowded room and calmly ask to see the receipts. The fight was long and stressful, and I wouldn't wish it on anyone. But when I'm out on a cold winter morning now, the diesel engine of my plow a familiar rumble in the quiet dawn, clearing the way for my neighbors. I know it was worth it. The roads are clear. The community is safe. And I'm just a guy doing my job, in the peace I fought so hard to reclaim. And that's more than enough.